Hello, folks. Welcome to GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. I'm Brett Kinsella, the founder of, GAIN, Generative AI News Rundown, but also Synthedia and VoiceBot.ai. We're here each week. We talk about the news of the day. We've got a lot of great stories for you this week. Meta made a huge announcement yesterday. It's going to probably single-handedly make NVIDIA's quarter, one of NVIDIA's quarters this year. We have news from ByteDance, which is really interesting, and we'll break that all down. OpenAI, Microsoft, Google Assistant changing again. Will.i.am is even in here. We've got a big robot startup that just landed $100 million. A lot of news. And helping me break it all down is my colleague, Eric Schwartz. Hey, Eric.
Hey, excited to get started on all the latest.
I'm excited too, to figure out what is going on out there. I mean, this has been a really interesting start of the new year. And I will tell you that I think there's a theme that's going on, or maybe a slightly different feeling in the market. And that last year at this time, everybody was scrambling. Nobody knew what they were doing. There were a few people claiming they know what they're doing. They changed it 4 times during the year. And we had the year of pilots, the year of experimentation, mass experimentation. And this year seems a little bit different. I see the strategies narrowing, like people who are going to be all things to all people are starting to say these are the things that we're focused on. I'm seeing the big companies start to focus themselves, narrowing in on how they're going to use this today. And this comes out a lot in the news this week.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, super. All right, folks. Everybody who's out there on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Twitter. I don't think we're streaming on Twitter this week. That's my mistake. We've got Mikkel Staniswala. Hey, Mikkel, good to see you here today. Just let us know where you're in from. Just give us in the comments. Just pop that in. And please let us know. What do you want to talk about today? Comments, questions, all those other types of things. Drop those in and we'll incorporate them into the discussion today. And for those of you who normally listen to this from a podcast, we are going to get this up on the podcast. I've been a little slow in sort of publishing some of these, but they are all available on YouTube immediately after the show. So you can always go to the VoiceBot and Synthedia YouTube channel. All right. First story today. I thought this was pretty interesting, and there's some context here. So what does it mean to have 350,000 NVIDIA H100s? Well, it seems like a big number, right? And we all noted when Elon Musk, I think it was 30,000 NVIDIA H100s, which for Twitter, but then wound up at XAI. I'm not really sure how that worked. But that's like you train models on NVIDIA GPUs. And I think a lot of people know that now. 350,000. I came across something from Thurrott that said that Azure only had 150,000 that were shipped in 2023, or this was like through the end of the third quarter. So maybe they got a few more at the end of the year, but like not this much. And AWS and Google Cloud had about a third that many. So we're talking about maybe through the first 3 quarters of the year, 250,000 shipped to the 3 cloud hyperscalers. Now there's other people like CoreWeave that have, are using these as well. There's OpenAI has some of their own. I mean, there's a lot of people that have these, and there have been some more things that are shipped. And so I think that are 350,000 at the end of this year means they're going to have a huge amount of computing power. Now, Google, AWS, Azure probably have more than that. Plus, they'll have the Grace Hoppers, which will be coming out. Plus, they also have the A100s, which is an earlier version of this. So it's not like they have maybe massively more computing power, but we're talking about cloud hyperscaler computing power. And Zuckerberg even said in his Instagram post that if you combine it with the other chips that they have, GPUs for training and running inference and generative AI, probably A100s from NVIDIA, maybe a few others, they have the equivalent of 600,000. And so now we are talking about cloud hyperscaler level of compute power. Eric Schwartz, what do you think?
Yeah, well, first of all, yes, absolutely, I agree. But the key thing, one of the things that we've talked about over last year is the shift in focus on certain elements of large language models. At first, it was all about the parameters. Then it became sifted into the training data and the amount and quality of that data and related elements. And if there's one thing that Meta can certainly claim to have, it's a lot of data. The fact that they iterated from Llama 1 to Llama 2 so quickly, and it wasn't a small upgrade. It was a very it was a massive improvement on almost every level. So Llama 3, assuming that they're thinking that it will be that level of change again, then they're thinking ahead and planning for, all right, well, we've proven we can do this. We've proven we have all the elements except just the raw compute power. And that's where you go to NVIDIA for. And now, you invest that much money in it, it means that you have a lot of confidence that this is going to pay off. And especially at Meta, where, there was the metaverse was supposed to be the big thing. And Mark Zuckerberg put a lot of his personal business / political capital into that, and it obviously didn't quite pan out the way he wanted. But if he's all in on this, it implies that he's not the only one, that the board and all the people holding the purse strings are saying, yeah, no, we agree, this time go $10 billion into this.
Well, he did actually mention the metaverse in his post. One other thing, actually, you mentioned the price. So just to think about the scale of this, it's a $10 billion investment, right? So right now, H100s typically sell for 30 to 35,000. They're not really discounted because there's so much more demand. I think that'll change once the Grace Hoppers are more widely available this year. But right now it looks like it's about a $10 billion investment, and that's obviously very significant. You mentioned the metaverse, and he did some sort of weird tie-in to the metaverse in his announcement, where he talked about smart glasses and the Meta Ray-Bans, and saying that essentially this is going to be the way that generative AI is integrated into the world. So he said metaverse, which is not the world. It's a whole nother parallel world. But then he said these glasses are going to be the way it's integrated in the world. And I think that's actually more interesting, because he talked specifically about, if you're going to have essentially an assistant, it can help you more, and it can help you more proactively if it can see what you can see and hear what you hear. And then it always has context if you ask for something, or it can actually just jump in if it notices something that might be helpful.
Yeah, and it's that constant, it's the history of technology, where it's about people having to adapt to technology versus improving the technology to adapt to people. And the concept of the metaverse very much felt like you have to become, you have to adapt to this world, this digital world of technology. But now it's like, well, actually, with generative AI, these intelligences these AI character types that you were interacting with will adapt to you and to your actual life, and suddenly it's a lot easier to adapt, and there's a lot broader interest in adapting it and using
Yeah,
it.
what an excellent point. I like the way you characterize that. That's very good. I will say that there's one other thing that he brought up that I thought was very notable that he brought up here. Actually, I'll make 2 points, but one is, he talks about general intelligence, which I think we can impute is what most people would call general intelligence or super intelligence, and that it's just going to take a lot of computing power to get there. Of course, I thought it was interesting because Jan LeCun said, basically, to get to AGI or super intelligence, it's not a computing problem. There's other things that have to happen. Um, but in any event, that's what he's doing that. And then he immediately just talks about assistants, right? He's just like, it's assistants everywhere. And so I think that'll be interesting to people. The other thing that I was thinking about was, is this really just about AGI, or because Facebook, Instagram, or just WhatsApp are so big, they just need more compute capacity than everybody else. So they may be training models, and he did say they're training Llama 3 right now. So I would expect that out in the next quarter or two. And he also mentioned that there's going to be other models. So we know of Seamless and Make a Video and all these other types of things that they've been, which are not available publicly now. Some researchers have access and some not even that. But I suspect that this is going to be, a lot of this is just going to go to inference. All these things are going to show up on these platforms, and they're just going to need compute capacity when 1 billion people start using them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, well, first of all, the whole general intelligence is it's fascinating how quickly the term artificial intelligence has been overused / debased to the point where they have to come up with another term to describe what was formerly called artificial intelligence. But also, the way Meta functions has been, one of the reasons it's so successful is that it's always been able to either buy or replicate whatever any potential rivals are doing, and do it in their own place, and telling people, you don't have to leave our network of apps to get the feature that you want. And I think that's going to apply to the generative AI elements as much as anything else.
Yeah, and McCall had a couple interesting ideas here, like your personal droid inside the metaverse, this assistant. It's going to be powered by Mark Zuckerberg, and it's much cheaper to acquire in real life, which is so true. This has been one of the issues of social robots. They're all super expensive and basically don't add much value as well. But that's a whole nother story. Okay, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. We try to do this every week. I'm Brett Kinsella. This is Eric Schwartz. Thanks for joining us today. Shout out to Radhika, who is coming in from Austin, Texas. Radhika, thanks for joining us. And Larry Moore as well from Falmouth, Mass. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate everybody coming out. This has been fun already. Okay, so let's get into a giant rival to Meta, and that's ByteDance. ByteDance owns TikTok, which is its crown jewel, but owns a lot of other things as well. And we can talk about that. Really interesting that they launched the Magic Video 2. If people had saw Magic Video before, that's essentially TikTok or ByteDance and TikTok getting into the business of having either video or image generation within their capabilities, which we've seen, but they're really just talking about the foundation model here. And one of the fascinating things about it is it's actually as good as they did some comparisons with Runway, with Pika Labs, with Stability AI's Stable Video Diffusion, and you look at these, they all look good, right? And the one on the left is actually, if you see this video playing, is actually our friends over at ByteDance. And so I think there's a few different things that occurred to me when I was looking at this, and I was sort of looking at the quality of what they're putting out. First of all, it's a multimodal model, which includes text to image, text to video, video to video, and then they have this video frame interpolation, but that's like just to make the videos better. So what we should see across ByteDance is these text to image, text to video type of models. The other thing is, my expectation is it makes sense for them just to do it for TikTok because they have control and they save the cost and all those other types of things. They might be the first Chinese company to actually have some of these services for U.S., European, Western audiences, which historically we really haven't seen much crossover. We see that China's a big market. The big Chinese companies there really focus on their market. And this has also been true in generative AI up to this point. Whereas ByteDance, they have a big Chinese market, but obviously the rest of the world is a huge market for them. And so it would not surprise me at all that they actually start making this available like Meta to third parties. Maybe not open source, maybe I don't, but I assume not open source, but more like Inflection AI or Runway that's got Gen 2, like making this available as an API in addition to infusing it through all their apps. What do you think?
I agree, and I think as you pointed to, one of the big reasons this is an important story, or could be a hugely important story, is the fact that most Chinese tech companies have limited or no real presence outside of China, or at least Asia. They tend to not pop up in the European markets or the American markets, and ByteDance, thanks to TikTok, has sort of gone past that usual barrier. And so what we're going to see is what's happening in that world of development, and see it pop up here in a way that we don't normally find software, and certainly AI software coming up here. And I think also that the video part, because video is obviously more complex than images or text, and the costs therefore are also higher. I think that you're right that it's not going to be an open source thing, but I also think that it's going to be an aspect of synthetic media where quality really is like even more important than cost, because if you're going to go for synthetic video, you're willing to pay costs, so you have to look at quality even more than you would with some of the other projects or other ways of using the generative AI models.
Yeah, and just to share folks who could actually view this, they did a quality comparison. Now, this is their people that they hired and these other type of things. So we haven't seen a replication of this study, but still, if you look at compared to Moon Valley, Pika, Morph, Gen 2, and Stable Video Diffusion, the human reviewers preferred either preferred significantly uh, the ByteDance Magic Video compared to the alternatives, or they were very close to a 50-50, like for Gen 2, which is Runway, or Stable Video Diffusion, which is Stability AI. Very close, but much stronger than Pico Labs. So I thought that was super interesting. And actually I felt good because I said, hey, I think that we're going to see a lot more of this in the future from ByteDance. And then there's a news story out. I don't think either of us have written about it yet, but we will. They actually have launched a number of apps already now with generative AI. Now they're actually using OpenAI, I think, for most of that, and maybe some other things. I'm not sure but now they have all these other platforms to run this through. And there's one other thing when you think of ByteDance, you always have to consider ByteDance it would be bad business for them to depend on a US based company, potentially US or European based, because there's always this risk that the US government will say, hey, that's protected technology that you can't actually have, you can't sell to a Chinese company. And so they have to have their own so they can control their own destiny.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, I think depending on how adoption and use of ByteDance's specific services and its technology in general goes, I think there's going to be a lot more debate in terms of policy and regulation from it, and it might happen faster than it will even in some of the more homegrown generative AI companies. I think it's just going to prompt a lot more action than
I think they're going to be a big player. I don't know how many people would use the third-party API, but I think they're going to be a very big player, and they might be a big third-party player as well as direct through their apps. Quick shout out to Claude Hain from Frederick, Maryland. Claude, thanks for coming back. Good to see you out there today. All right, let's put ByteDance to bed. Let's talk about the other big thing. ChatGPT has a new competitor from Papa Microsoft.
Papa Microsoft, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's that the odd synergy of Microsoft and OpenAI has been sort of the understated story, I think, because OpenAI is not just supplying technology, obviously it has its own range of products, and there's been a lot of like OpenAI comes out with something and then Microsoft does the same thing using the same models within its own ecosystem, which has its pros and cons, obviously. But in this case, both on the consumer side and the enterprise side, Microsoft's Copilot is coming out with what OpenAI has come out with sometimes many months ago. There's the instead of ChatGPT Plus, it's Microsoft Copilot Pro, which is again the $20 a month. You get more advanced models, better services. Presumably acts differently than ChatGPT Plus, but basically the same concept. And then on the enterprise side, Copilot is pushing out what is essentially again the enterprise version of ChatGPT, but with all the additional Microsoft branded elements that certainly a lot of larger companies and even small companies probably are more comfortable with engaging with than what is technically still a startup.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess a couple other things I'll just put in there is that it's $20 a month. So that's right at ChatGPT for individual. They charge $30 a month if you want to use it with Microsoft 365, which is the business version of it. But this is basically the personal edition of Copilot. There's not much difference. You can use GPT-4 in either of these. But some people did notice that I think you can get like a family edition of Microsoft Office for $10 a month, and you can have like 5 people on it.
Yeah.
And it says in there, and I was looking at sort of old habit reading the fine print. It says in there that the $20 a month is per person. So if you have like a family edition of Microsoft Office, and let's say you've got 5 people on it, you're paying $10. But if you want them all to have Copilot, like integrated, and you can't use it integrated unless you do this, that's going to be $130 now per month, which would be a great trick if they can pull it off.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of working out the kinks, closing loopholes. Yeah, because it is this weird hybrid of adapting an existing product, creating a new product, and trying to simultaneously keep the parts of that OpenAI has developed that people really want, while also augmenting it with the Microsoft side of things. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are people a lot of people, I'm sure, who will be like, well, I don't know what's going on with this OpenAI company, but I've used Microsoft for 40 years, so yeah, I'll buy their product.
This is the strategy of just picking up money that's laying on the sidewalk. I think there's
100%.
some, there's Microsoft fans out there who are going to prefer the Microsoft version of this more than the OpenAI version. There are people who are, will just use this. I think really what's going to mostly happen is a lot of these family editions have, one or two people on it. A lot of them are just going to basically they're going to spend 3 to 5 times more per month with Microsoft. And Microsoft really brought that price down. I hadn't realized that the family and student editions were so low now. I think the student edition is like $7 a month. I mean, that's a loss leader for them at that point. And so this is a way for them potentially to gain some of that lost revenue back, which I think is super interesting. Okay. So, hey, who haven't we really talked about yet? Well, we've mentioned them several times, but we haven't really talked about OpenAI yet, but like they make news every week. Tell us about OpenAI in the news over the past few days.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I feel like almost every week for a while there was new products or new models they're using, but now there's quite a lot going on in its policy side of things and governance. And in this case, it's about the 2024 elections, not just in the U.S. but also in the U.K. and India. A lot of the major democracies are going to face their first big election since generative AI and synthetic media became so widespread and easy to use. So OpenAI is keen to make sure that it doesn't get into trouble for how its products are used, and keen to show that it's working on ways to prevent and limit misuse, whether it's malicious deep fakes or generative AI writing, telling people wrong information about how to vote or where to vote, or the incorrect information about whatever might be on the ballot. And so yeah, they're working with some nonpartisan voting groups. They're working on closing any technical loopholes that might allow people to create, for instance, images of politicians doing things that the politicians have not done. It's a lot of projects, and the intent certainly seems positive and not nothing controversial there, but the actual impact or how well this will work to stop the misuse that we've already seen popping up of generative AI technology remains to be seen, I think.
Yeah, I think so. The other thing I'll just do in closing on this, which I think is interesting, is there's this different type of deep fake that's going to be coming up. And so if you think about like GPTs or any type of way where you can customize a model to, so we have this idea of voice clones, we have this idea of like deep fake video where you have the likeness of somebody on screen, but we also have this concept of replicating the way an individual or an organization talks about things to plausibility. And so it'll be really interesting how they navigate that. And because that's viewed as like one of the great uses of GPTs right now. You can like your brand voice. You can basically just, if you want to edit something or summarize it, pop it in there. You've already defined what your brand voice is in the GPT, and it rewrites whatever you have in it. So I think this will be super interesting. The other thing I thought was, which I thought was, I'll say interesting, but I didn't really know this was like on the horizon for them, is that you wrote a story about OpenAI lifting a ban on military applications.
Yeah, it's what had happened is that for OpenAI's policy had been sort of a blanket ban on everything military, including obviously weaponry and things like that. But they don't want to exclude themselves from non-weaponry based projects. So national security, cybersecurity things, all the sort of non the indirect warfare. They don't want to use generative AI to develop uh, actual things that would kill people, but they also but they're fine with working with the Department of Defense to design new cybersecurity measures or new ways to prevent, I guess, other kinds of generative AI or other sources of generative AI deepfakes and so on from being used to attack people. So they sort of clarified that and sort of made it clear that it's not that they're against working with defense departments around the world. It's just that they're going to be selective in what kinds of projects they allow their technology to be part of. And yeah, it's kind of funny because the Department of Defense already was using OpenAI services for certain things, even though I guess technically that would have been a violation of their previous policies. The Army was using ChatGPT to write press releases. The Department of Defense put together a generative AI task force that was already testing out both OpenAI and other generative AI companies and their technology. So now this just sort of makes official what had already been going on, which is that the military can use OpenAI's technology, but only when OpenAI says it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and just like drawing a box around what's weapon. Of course, that'll be debatable at some point. Okay, so let's move on. Hey, folks, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. We try to do this every week. We stream live on YouTube and LinkedIn, and I think going forward we'll also be on Twitter. But I think most people like to watch this live on YouTube or LinkedIn, and it's always available. If you came in part way, it'll be available on YouTube afterwards in VoiceBot's YouTube channel. All right, so there's another story that's from earlier in the month, but we didn't talk about it last week, and I just wanted to put it down because I think it speaks to a larger trend which is going on. So Intel launched a company called Articulate, and it's about on-prem generative AI. So if you think about all these capabilities that we have today, the language models are hosted in a cloud. Most of this is multi-tenant in some way. If you're using an application, it certainly is. And if you want to do your own solution, you basically have to roll it your own. It's like if you have issues about maybe a military contractor, they can't have any of the data go out or something like that. They have to basically host it themselves. And so Intel has identified this opportunity for enterprises that want to have an installed version of generative AI. They can build that all up. And so they announced this company called Articulate. There's not a lot of information there. It seems like they're working with a couple companies, but just think about this: is I get the benefits of generative AI, but I have maximum control because I'm not totally dependent on any third party, whether it be cloud, large language model provider, or anything. I take the raw materials in, then it's mine.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen other on-premises technology before. It's as you said, it's a way of adding control, and if for companies at a certain size or a certain level, then that sort of control and security makes, and honestly, the speed of it is more than makes up for any additional cost of not using the cloud or relying on third parties. So I think there is a market for this, and clearly Intel has the connections to know when it's when this might be worthwhile to them to create. And it's odd that they're spinning it off this way, I think, but I guess if for presumably business purposes, it's easier to have it be not directly under Intel's umbrella.
Yeah. So I just expect to see more of this. I mean, we even saw in the announcement out of Accenture in December, which was a pretty popular article that we posted in Synthedia, which they were talking about this idea that, hey, we've done a lot of business in this space, but a lot of the big enterprises, they're facing barriers. One of them is data readiness, which is another conversation for a different day. But like, there's a lot of these issues around governance and control that are stopping large enterprises who have had a successful proof of concept or pilot and aren't taking it to production yet because they have to work through some of these issues. And maybe Articulate will be one of those. I think there's other things out there that'll probably be bigger, but like, I don't know, maybe Intel can do this. So you also had a couple stories on our old friends at Google and specifically around Google Assistant. So
Yeah,
you had this thing they snipped By the way, your article art, because I think you created this. It's just
Yeah,
like so good.
it's I've gotten very good at the sort of nuanced prompts that make some of these images work better than others. So
There you go.
yeah, in this case, obviously a Google smart speaker cutting up icons of Google products and features, because that's essentially what happened. It's um, part of how Google has really reoriented around generative AI, which for them means Bard and the Gemini models, and yeah, and the Bard AI assistant, and they already had started merging the two, the idea of assistant with Bard, for instance, but now it's sort of they're taking a look at Google Assistant and saying, all right, there's all these things that we have made a feature that people basically don't use or really don't seem to care a lot about, or are just probably expensive to maintain because they involve um, multiple platforms sending messages or controlling different media in a way that is more difficult to do, or at least more complex to do without
Right.
using an LLM. So
Or it's going to go, or it's, yeah, and it's just going to wind up in Bard. And like the logical follow on to this is, oh, we're reorganizing. What happens? You had
mhm.
another story that a bunch of people were laid off in the Google Assistant team.
Yeah, a lot of people. Yeah, basically, most of the, as far as I've been able to determine, most of the sub teams under the Google Assistant umbrella are shut down. It's people either let go, or obviously some redistribution among other parts of Alphabet. But now it's pretty clear that whatever the voice assistant of Google looks like in a year or two, it's not going to be the Google Assistant based projects. It's going to be either redistributed under Android or under Google Maps, or things like that, or it's going to be part of the Gemini Bard world.
I think this was a Synthesia prediction. You and I both worked on this, basically saying, hey, if you just look at it, GDE shut down, the
Yeah.
Google Developer Executive for our experts program for Google Assistant. You could just see it. Bard, Google Assistant with Bard, all these things, they all came under Sissy Sao, the executive at Google, who now owns both of these things. All the momentum is there. And so I think this is logical. I don't, there was like an interesting discussion on LinkedIn last week about whether this was good strategy or not on their part. But it's more branding. I think like from a technical standpoint, this makes sense. And I think this is always the problem with Google, is that they try a lot of things, which is good, but then they shut a lot of things down if it doesn't sort of work out just the way they want it.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like Amazon took a lot of at bats with products around Alexa and shut some of them down, but some of them it built into like a bigger offering, like a product offering. Whereas Google, it seems, I think a lot of it is like they think it's just like it's an engineering problem, and a lot of times it's more than that.
Yeah,
But
it's also,
here we go. Art is the future.
well, it's also, I think, just that I think you're totally right about the branding sense. I mean, Google Assistant is such a generic term that could mean anything to anyone, whereas Amazon decided, and Apple even decided to keep a name, an identity in a way that Google Assistant just doesn't have. So it's a lot
What is
less
the
of
biggest? What is the biggest assistant in the world? Like the most used assistant in the world that is not offered by a company that's in the cell phone space. What is it called? Chat GPT.
Yeah, oh
That's
yeah, that's
pretty
what I thought.
darn
I was like, wait a
generic.
minute.
So
Yeah,
I'm not really
yeah,
sure. Like, I mean, I understand that we've talked a lot about this. Like, the personalization was a thing, effective trust, like personality, all these things. It was a thing for assistants as people were sort of getting used to the idea of an assistant. It may be that everybody has enough familiarity. They don't care about that anymore. It may be that ChatGPT is just an anomaly. I will say that Google had 500 million monthly active users on Google Assistant as of 2 years ago. I don't know if it went up or down. Uh, so Google Assistant, generic name, it did fine. In fact, it was ahead of Siri in terms of adoption, which has at least some personality.
yeah,
So I think
because the
it's like,
branding was, yeah,
yeah, but so I don't know if that's I don't know if that was holding them back at this point.
No,
Like they'd already gone to the trouble of telling people what it was, and
yeah,
everybody else is doing like Copilot. That has no personality. We used to have Cortana from
yeah.
Microsoft personality, but now they go to Copilot, no personality. So it's like Google's like going the opposite. They're like, oh, we missed the opportunity to have like a personality. Let's do it with Bard. But if you use Bard, it doesn't have a personality.
Yeah, and even Bard to a certain extent. I mean, it's not a name, it's a title, it's a position, and that's why I thought Google Assistant was like, you're not using Google Assistant, you're using Google, and this is the assistant from Google, and, as opposed to something else. And I think that's why they're able to. One reason they're able to redistribute those functions among other products. It's all the Google
Right.
Maps or the Google whatever.
So Jurgen
But yeah,
says, Jurgen Gravestein, hey, Jurgen, good to see you here. Google's probably working on next gen assistant, whatever it will be called, Bard, maybe Pixie. I did hear something about Pixie recently, but I can't
yeah,
trace it.
they clearly think Apple is being complacent and that they now have a chance to at least take part of the iPhone market.
Okay, by the way, yeah, okay, got it. But Pixie is not a good name.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you, like, it might be appealing in some ways, but like, it lacks appeal in other ways. Shout out to Costas as well. Thanks for joining us, Costas, today. All right, we're going to move into a new section in the generative AI news rundown. We've always like covered that. We've covered this a lot, but it just seems like this first quarter is going to be filled with this and already has been. We'll call it the partner parade. So everybody's making their partnership announcements. Generally speaking, in technology markets, I think of partnerships as low value news, like product, customer wins. Those are like high value, new technology, even money, like big revenue or something, because at least that gives us market demand. Partner, who knows what that means, right? But in this space, it has been kind of important because a lot of these things are a source of demand, and that a lot of these like channel partners of the generative AI technology players it are investing a lot. And so I think of it this way: is like the partners in this case are essentially channels, so they're kind of like customers for the technology companies. And the first one you wrote about was Microsoft and Vodafone. Now, this isn't the first telecom company that we've seen, set something up, but this is the first one that I can recall that had like, I don't think it's exclusive, but like this big of a commitment just to like Microsoft.
Yeah, and a big commitment, not just in monetary terms, but in time. I mean, a decade is a long time in any kind of technology market, and so it's the same. Vodafone is really is not. It doesn't want to make this a short term thing, and they want to like put in the time and effort now for the long term benefit. And Vodafone is a really big international telecom, and the adoption of generative AI among telecoms is I would say accelerating. And there's a lot of it's outside of the U.S., outside of China, outside of even some of the European markets. I think there's a demand that is either already growing or is going
Right.
to be there in a year. And Vodafone says, hey, we'll work with Microsoft. We'll work with them to put their generative AI technology into our products, and we'll provide them with the kinds of data and other benefits of working with the telecom.
Right.
And yeah, I think these sort of the sort of blue chip long term companies are going to have to either do what Vodafone's doing or go make their own generative AI platforms in order to provide the kinds of services their customers want.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing too is that people don't know, like they might not be familiar with this from a telecom standpoint. So telecom companies, they offer essentially dial tone and these other services, whether it be wireless or fixed line or internet, to a lot of small businesses, enterprises. But they also sell other technology, and very often third-party technology, because they own these customers already. So it's just they become a channel. And so the way I look at this deal is Vodafone saying, I'm going to spend $150 million a year over 10 years. And that's what I'm going to do. I also believe that we will see a deal with Vodafone and Google within the next 2 quarters, something similar. But everyone can hold me to that. But this is normally the way these things work.
Well,
But they see a way to drive more revenue from their captive customer base from this. And I think that's great. And this is a time to market. As opposed to building their own solution, all these other types of things, they can just repackage Microsoft stuff and just like mark it up and make a little bit of money on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus, if they're selling like hosting services or telecom, data transport service, something like this, if their customers use more of it because they have these tools, then they could actually, they sort of double dip on both of these types of things, which I think is super interesting.
Especially if the next generation, or 2-3 generations down the line of the sort of baseline smartphone includes generative AI access of some form, then if everyone in many African countries is using a Microsoft Copilot as their default generative AI assistant, then that's a big win for Microsoft.
Yeah, absolutely. So another one that just came up, McKinsey's expanding their alliance with SAP, which is sort of interesting because McKinsey, historically a strategy firm, and SAP, obviously enterprise software. They didn't actually typically overlap in the past. That was like usually got handed off to one of the technology and consultancies at that point, where SAP had really strong relationships with Deloitte and Capgemini and Accenture and all those folks. But a lot of people don't know McKinsey has this software business, Quantum Black, which they stood up a couple of years ago. It's historically is much more on the analytics side. So this will be interesting. That's what I expect this ultimately to be. And then we have another example here of a partnership of CapGemini, who has already done a big announcement last year. I think it was July, with Azure, and they're doing a new strategic collaboration with AWS. And so this is like, and if maybe they've done one with Google, but I expect the Google one will come soon, because the big consultancies, they just have to have partnerships with each of the cloud providers, because most of their customers, enterprise customers, have a cloud preference. And so they have to have something where they can work with them. And so we'll see more of these over time. All right. You, Eric, has written a couple other stories too about generative AI in retail. And we haven't seen as much generative AI in retail as we've seen in other areas. A lot of internal things, knowledge management. We've seen some customer support, a little bit of retail. But obviously Walmart made some announcements at CES a couple of weeks ago. Amazon has new announcements this week. Why don't you talk about both of those and how that talks about the shift in generative AI moving into retail, and particularly customer facing applications?
Yeah, it's been interesting because there's been a lot of experiments, I would say, or small scale pilots of generative AI within both the buying and selling side of the commerce equation. But Walmart has just gone ahead and made generative AI like a key part of their search and their refill programs. That Walmart is a pretty comprehensive place to buy things, and that's included their e-commerce work. And now they're making generative AI part of that by basically what we were talking about before, about making the technology come to people, so that instead of having to try to sort through different products by keyword to try to figure out what you need for your house or what you need for a specific event, it'll show you, you can talk about what you're doing and have Walmart's search engine employ generative AI to say, well, if their example is like, if you're having a football party, here's all the things that might be good at a football party, and here's all the products that fall under that category. Or if you're someone who has a subscription service for home goods, then the generative AI can work out whether you should be proactively reminded to either renew something, or if there's something that might go with something you already buy. It's really trying to make the sort of personal shopper more of a reality in the e-commerce space.
And super important, because a lot of times the consumer who's shopping doesn't have the vocabulary that the product producers and the retailers use to describe products. Sometimes they do, but a lot of times there's certain things that are very specific to like a type of product, which is like a feature that might have a technical or unique term associated with it. Like, think about back in the day, people didn't know what Gore-Tex was. Like that, it turns out to be like an important product feature that's integrated, or like Vibram soles, for a certain type of shoes. And so this, because the LLMs are so good at intent recognition, it can translate between these different ways that people ask about it. And the other thing though is like when talking about the Amazon shopper, what a
Yeah,
great practical solution to be able to summarize answers from reviews.
yeah, exactly. It's this idea that online shopping is it's a fire hose, and you have to like try to narrow it down into a stream of data that's actually you can actually consume. And Amazon obviously at the top of that. So for them, what they're testing out now is basically if you go to a product's page and you say, well, there's a lot of reviews, there's a lot of details. I just want to know this one thing. You can ask this little AI chatbot who will go through all the listing. It'll go through the reviews and then answer your question. And at the moment it's pretty limited. It's sticking. It's not going to compare anything. It's not going to put things in your cart, but it will answer your query based on what's on that page in terms of the reviews and the listing. And although a small part, but one that I think is actually really good is that because it can translate among many languages, suddenly all those reviews written in languages you don't speak are useful to you and can actually be helpful in getting information about, especially if it's a product that's maybe more widely used in a country outside of the one that you live in.
Yeah, I like this from a variety of aspects. It's like when you're doing online shopping, because you can't like pick it up and feel it like you would in a live retail environment. Like you require more information. There's always questions that you're going to ask that aren't answered. And if it has thousands of reviews, it's very hard to like sift through that to figure it out. The other thing is very specific benefit here is like compatibility
Mhm.
situations. Like does this work with this device or something like that? And sometimes that's included in the product specification, which is not always easy to find in what the seller provides. Oftentimes, if there's a lot of reviews, it will be covered in there, but then you have to figure out how to find it. You might do a page search and it doesn't have all the things. And so I think this could be pretty amazing. Anything that aggregates a lot of information about something that might be useful to you, and then you can just query it, kind of like one of the first Anthropic Claude use cases. I think is just a super thing, and I think it's going to make a big difference over time. Hey,
Yeah.
Leslie Pound had a question. Do we have any stats on Bard usage versus ChatGPT? I don't know. Like people can add it into the chat if you'd like, if you know these numbers. Now, I will say from ChatGPT, we do have numbers. At Dev Day, they said 100 million weekly active users of ChatGPT. I've seen numbers certainly over 200 million, 230 million was one specifically from the middle of last year that had at least tried it. I think that was there was actually a mention of that as being monthly active users, but we'll see. I think if they had 200 million monthly active users, they would have said that at Dev Day. So I'm going to say that it's probably weekly is 100 million and monthly is a little bit under 2 million, at least at Dev Day. And now there's GPTs, and so maybe it's more heavily used. But I don't think I've seen any numbers on Bard usage. Google's been very tight in releasing data about that. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it's also that sometimes the lines are a little blurry because there's ChatGPT and there's obviously the API that is the same thing as ChatGPT or Copilot, and with Bard, we've talked about like how it's sort of filtering into other products, including Google Assistant. So I
Oh
think the
yeah,
numbers
in
can be
workspace and things like that.
yeah, the
Yeah.
numbers can be variable depending on how you define it. But I think that ChatGPT is definitely bigger than Bard. I don't think there's a question about that. The more important question, I think, certainly in the next year will be the retention or how the continuing usage, and also is there going to be any migration of people who do like to test out multiple apps at a time and decide, oh yes, this is the one to stay with, or this is it's not as good as this other one, so I'm shifting from ChatGPT to Bard.
All right, cool. All right, hey folks, this is Gabe, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week. I'm Brett Kinsella. That's Eric Schwartz. Yeah, we're analysts, journalists in this space. We look at this stuff. Thanks for joining us today. Feel free to let us know where you're coming in from, ask questions, make comments, as some of the other people in the room already have. Shout out to everybody there on LinkedIn and YouTube. Oh, and by the way, if you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, if you just like smash that like button, I think that's what all the cool YouTube influencers say. But if you just give us a like, that's always great. So I want to talk about a couple more things before we wrap up. really interesting study came out of Anthropic. Deceptive LLMs, model poisoning, and other little known generative AI security risks is the way I characterize it. But there's a story behind this. And there's two things that they talked about, one of which I was pretty familiar with, which is essentially this idea of model poisoning. And when you're creating a model, a generative AI model, you can actually put things in the model that's hard because there's not really observability to a great degree, and sort of what's in some of these models that would eventually make the model operate in a way that would be counter to whatever the developers or the enterprise's intent. So a perfect example of this that they put in there was like, oh, you could have something in there that says if it's the year 2023, develop software code like how you would for best practices. If it's 2024, add this vulnerability for SQL injection into the application. And so basically it's like a sleeper type of thing. And there's other ways to do this. There's a lot of different types of things with model poisoning, model compromise. And security is going to be a really hot topic, sort of the second half of this year around generative AI. We already see it bubbling up, but it's going to be even much bigger later. So there's this idea of like, what can you do about that? So that's one aspect. There's this other thing which I wasn't aware of, which was this idea of a large language model that has deceptive instrument alignment, is what they call it. But what this is this is related to the reward function of the models. And it's like the model has a behavior that is, we'll just call it nefarious. It's like something you don't want. But it learns through the reward function through supervised fine tuning that it doesn't want to show that. Right. And so it'll actually optimize to like show you something completely different. And I know Jurgen's in the room. He wrote something about this as well. And so it's basically saying, hey, you're fine tuning me. You're my reward. I get a reward if I don't do this thing that's like in my code. But that thing doesn't get eliminated from the model performance. So it may or likely will emerge at some point when you get a lot of people working on it. Both of these scenarios, which is really sort of the hidden capability that the model, like, and that's why they call it deceptive, hides from you, but it's not like it doesn't necessarily, the model doesn't have nefarious intent. It's there, but it sort of learns to hide it. But then we have this other thing where the model poisoning is nefarious intent. But the other thing about it is apparently this problem is bigger for larger models. It's like harder to detect, like a bigger problem that we're going to have. And interestingly enough, I interpret from the data in the report, which is a very long research report, I think 70 pages, that Anthropic's constitutional AI does not solve this problem.
Yeah, it does not. That's what Anthropic made very clear, is that it's not it's not an Anthropic model issue. It's an issue that OpenAI also has to deal with. It's also just it's almost a fascinating idea of like the AI is sophisticated enough to be tricked in this way, and that's something that was less flexible or less complex would not be. You couldn't trick it the same way; it wouldn't work. It would just stop working entirely, which is not the same thing. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's a little concerning just because of the potential for malicious use. But on the other hand, it's like all technology has vulnerabilities. The whole point is just to try to keep ahead of the those who would exploit them, and that's what's going to be necessary.
Data poisoning, model poisoning going to be big deals this year. They're more pernicious, bigger issues than what people are looking at for like prompt injections, which sort of everyone understands now, I think. But prompt injections are going to be far easier to deal with than the idea that you basically corrupted the model or corrupted the data set associated with the model ahead of time. So look out for that. That's what we want people to do. It's just like, I thought that, and this is like a fascinating study. So I recommend people take a look at it. You can, there's a link to the whole study in the Synthedia post on this. And then before we get to winners and losers of the week, we have a couple questions and comments, which we'll get to, but I also just wanted you to hit on this fact that you've got a new company out here, 1X, $100 million to build robots. And this, this robot here looks kind of like the new Tesla robot.
Yeah,
And is
the
that a
humanoid.
person? Is that actually a robot, or is that a person in there
That's a
like the
robot.
original Tesla robot?
No,
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 but
this is
like
that's an
that's
actual
what,
robot.
was he dancing around like the Tesla performance
No,
artist?
their hobbies are a little less interesting than dancing. They're just really into sorting things by color and size, which you know, less exciting, but obviously more useful in a factory setting. Um, but yeah, no, it's 1x, $100 million for these humanoid robots designed for all kinds of purposes, not only on the industrial side in factories, but as service workers, essentially working in uh, environments that involve other humans, whether it's even as waiters, for instance. And part of what makes it interesting is that they raised a lot of money very quickly. This round was from EQT Ventures, but their previous round, which was much smaller, was involved OpenAI. It's very clear that OpenAI is interested in how their technology can be employed by in robotics, and there's a lot of interest in that. I would say that I've written about using GPT-4 to train robots, something NVIDIA is doing. There's researchers who have linked GPT-4 to a humanoid robot and essentially
Right.
trained it through voice commands. And I think that there's the hardware and the software side of robotics, and the hardware side has advanced a lot in the last several years, but now it may be the key milestone for the software training side of humanoid robots has now been reached, and it'll be a lot easier to make these kinds of tools useful in more environments than it would have ever been possible before.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's great. So we have a couple of questions here too. I just want to hit on really quickly. So Martin S. From YouTube said, "How confident are you that hallucinations will be largely resolved within the next year?" And I have zero confidence. I think that it's all managed issues at this point, so you can significantly reduce them, but largely resolved. Like, we might use that term differently. It's not going to be resolved, and this is going to be persistent for some time. There are a lot of techniques that can be used to sort of either make these like not important, or like just so rare that it doesn't matter, or people are applying this to areas where 100% accuracy all the time doesn't have to be there. There's what you're going to see a lot more is this post generation verification step, which is going to be a much bigger deal. There are other ways that we're doing this already, but like we're going to see these review processes coming up. And then the Nick Newman also put in here, and this is going back to Leslie's question earlier. Thanks a lot, Justin, too, for joining us today. Nick said that they did a national consumer poll in the UK around awareness and usage, and ChatGPT has awareness about 4 times more than Bard. And if you go to the LinkedIn version of this show, he actually has a Dropbox, which I assume has the report in there. So thanks a lot for doing that, Nick. Tim. Okay, Eric, let's do a quick wrap up here for winners and losers of the week. I'm going to pick my loser for the week is Google Assistant users. And I think it's to a certain extent, I'm going to say Google as well, because I really think this is a mistake. There's this idea of assistance and this concept of cognitive trust and versus effective trust, which Tobias Dingle at Willow Tree like to talk about a lot over the years. And Google Assistant largely works for the things that it does. Bard frequently does not work properly for the things that it does. And keeping more Google Assistant, the stuff that like is reliable, and then adding on Bard, I think would be a better strategy than taking something that is inherently unreliable. And not to say that it's even mostly unreliable, but it's inherently unreliable because frequently enough it's unreliable, and trying to add on to the things that you can trust, I think is going to be a huge mistake. So that's my loser for the week is Google Assistant users who just get less features. Maybe they're not using them anyway, but like Google itself, because I think it's actually made a big mistake here.
I mean, I would absolutely agree, but I would also say another loser is all the people who worked for Google who probably spent years invested in developing these projects. So it's not just the users; it's the actual people behind behind Google Assistant who now have to figure out something else for their future.
Yeah. And my winner this week is NVIDIA because like 350,000 H100s or like just to one customer. That's pretty amazing. It's going to keep that money train flowing for quite a while at NVIDIA. How about you? Who's your winner?
Well, we didn't even get to touch on it because obviously there's so much to cover. But Will.i.am has once again convinced tech companies to throw tons of money and other resources his way. In this case, for a new podcast that he will be co-hosting with a generative AI chatbot on Sirius XM. And it's fascinating. It's, as a name, he's popped up a couple times a year, I'd say, for many years now, with every new big tech either fad or just innovation. And yeah, it's, kudos to him. He's very interested in it, and he's pursuing it, and able to convince people that it's not just that he's a musician and an artist in that regard, that he's also he should be at the one of the faces of new technology.
Yeah, I think he's a great creator. But I think in this space he's been poisoned. He's the opposite of the Midas touch. He's people don't even know this. Like he raised $150 million for Omega. Like that business is gone. Like almost everything he's involved in technology's gone sideways. Maybe there's something that I'm not aware of, but like the things that he's been the lead on have not gone well. But maybe this will go well because this is actually much closer to what people are doing. Hey, Brian, howdy, fellow bots there. I think good to see you there. And Leslie Pound, just to close this out, is there a reduction or elimination in hallucinating for in-house LLM? Not necessarily. There's techniques that you can use, which you might be able to have more control over for an in-house LLM versus one that's hosted. But I wouldn't say that there's a reduction just from that. It's actually how you set it up and what techniques you use to reduce large language model hallucinations. But these are all great questions. I appreciate everybody coming out today. Thanks a lot. Let us know what you think, what you want to talk about in the next coming weeks. Give us a like on LinkedIn and YouTube. And I hope you join us next week. I think we'll be back on, it might be Friday next week too. We'll let you know, but we will do a live stream at some point next week as well. And hopefully on Thursday. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.